Hello everyone. Today we're delving into the life of Mary Ann Bevan, an English woman who lived during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Around 1906, she began developing a rare medical illness that distorted her face and other features. In later years, this tragically led to her being cruelly known as the ugliest woman in the world. But what happened to her? And what did she make of her life? Let's explore her poignant yet compelling story with Project 360 Official. Mary Ann Bevan, born as Mary Ann Webster in Plaistow, East London on December 20th, 1874, was one of 8 children in a poor family. As she entered her adult years, she began training as a nurse, a profession that had boomed in the second half of the 19th century in Britain thanks to reforms in nursing practice introduced by Florence Nightingale in the 1850s and 1860s. Mary completed her training by the late 1890s, and by 1900, she was working as a nurse in London. Photos of her from this time reveal her to have been an attractive brunette. In 1903, Mary Ann married Thomas Bevan, a London greengrocer whom she had been seeing for some time. Thus, Mary Ann Webster became Mary Ann Bevan. They quickly started a family, and by the early 1910s, they had 4 children. But then, in 1914, Thomas died prematurely, which was a severe blow to Mary Ann, both economically and, of course, emotionally. She would now have to raise their young family herself, and they were not very well off. What's more, around 1906, Mary Ann had begun suffering from a rare illness called acromegaly. Acromegaly is a disorder of the pituitary gland, the organ that regulates the production of hormones in human beings. The disease is caused by an overproduction of growth hormones. This is a limited problem in younger patients who are still growing. But once people reach their adult years, their growth plates start to close. If they develop acromegaly, the excessive production of growth hormones causes them to start growing again. But now the body's growth plates are largely sealed, and this results in abnormalities to their body. And the patient can suffer a lot of pain. In more than 95% of cases, the underlying cause of the disease is a benign tumor having developed on the pituitary gland, known as a pituitary adenoma. It affects about 6 people out of every 100,000 and usually begins to occur in middle age. Symptoms of the disease typically start with the enlargement of feet and hands, and then progress to distortions and expansion of the face and other parts of the body, as would occur with Mary Ann Bevan. Later, joint pain and headaches develop periodically, and the sufferer's voice will often deepen. There are treatments for acromegaly today. Surgery can be used to try and remove the tumor from the pituitary. However, because this requires brain surgery, medications and radiation therapy are the preferred frontline treatments. Unfortunately, though, in Mary Ann Bevan's time, little was known about the disease, and there was no effective treatment of any kind available for it. So she had to soldier on, despite it starting to affect her daily life. Mary Ann had first begun exhibiting symptoms of the disease around 1906. As is common with pituitary disorders, her hands and feet first appeared swollen, and then the physical damage caused by the disease got worse as the years went on. She appears to have quit her nursing job at some time in the late 1900s and early 1910s, as her facial features and other parts of her body became more out of joint. Thomas Bevan, who was devoted to his wife, seems not to have minded it, and was happy for her to stay at home if it was what she preferred in responding to the onset of the condition. But when Thomas died in 1914, Mary Ann was left in a desperate situation when she had to provide for her 4 young children, the youngest of which was still an infant. By this time, Mary Ann's face was becoming more and more drawn and masculine-looking, and folds of skin were starting to droop under her eyes. Consequently, in the conditions of the time, her appearance was making her less and less employable as time went by. Thus, Mary Ann had to go between jobs in the years that followed her husband's death. But she was constantly struggling to make ends meet. Finally, in the late 1910s, she decided to try and capitalize financially on the manner in which the disease had devastated her body. At this time, she entered a competition to find the world's ugliest woman, which had been placed in a newspaper by one Claude Bartram, the European agent for the American circus, Barnum and Bailey. Mary Ann sent in a photo which caught Bartram's attention. He contacted Bevan and offered her a job at the Barnum and Bailey circus in the United States. Mary Ann was initially reluctant, but eventually agreed to it when she was offered £10 a week for a year, in addition to having all of her travel expenses covered and receiving additional money from sales of any postcards of her at the circus. With this money, she would now be able to provide for her children's education. The Barnum and Bailey Circus was just one of many shows which were held across America and other countries in the 20th century, which today would be considered callous and entirely politically incorrect. These shows would feature individuals who were considered spectacles, usually owing to some abnormality or their being the victim of some genetic disorder or disease, as in the case of Mary Ann Bevan. For instance, such shows might feature giants and dwarfs, who were respectively suffering from gigantism or dwarfism. Or they could include conjoined twins and albinos, or individuals who had been born without a limb or were very large in girth. It was in shows like this that Mary Ann Bevan would perform for the next few years in America. In the beginning, her work involved a tour of Hampshire in England, but she was soon contacted by the head of the circus in America to come over to America. Accordingly, she set off from Southampton to America in 1920. There, she discovered that she was actually working now for the Ringling Brothers Circus. The Ringling Brothers Circus had first been established in Wisconsin back in 1884 by the 5 Ringling brothers, the sons of German immigrants to America. In 1919, shortly before Bevan's arrival in America, it merged with the Barnum and Bailey Circus. The combined operation began being advertised as the greatest show on earth. Thus, when she was featured in their show, Bevan was forming part of a world-famous circus of the early 20th century. She quickly gained some notoriety in the sideshows of America, featuring in several newspapers who described her as the ugliest woman in the world. Within a few months, Bevan was one of the stars of the show, and she even soon featured on the pages of Time magazine. This was compounded by the decision to dress her during the show in men's clothing or unattractive garments in such a way as to make her seem more masculine and emphasize the damage which the disease inflicted on her. With this notoriety, the Ringling Brothers Circus made more money, and Bevan received a substantial portion of it. By 1923, she is said to have earned about £20,000 during her time in the United States, a figure equal to well in excess of £500,000 today. But one can only wonder what the emotional and psychological impact of being displayed as a human oddity at the circus night after night had on her during these years. Mary Ann returned to Europe in 1925 to take part in a show in Paris. But ultimately, she took the decision to relocate her children to New York City with the money she earned. She was able to send the 4 children to boarding school and for them to live in relative comfort. She continued to work periodically at the Coney Island Dreamland show in Brooklyn. In 1927, Bevan became a patient of Harvey Cushing, a distinguished American neurosurgeon and pathologist who pioneered brain surgery in the early 20th century. Cushing was unable to provide much by way of remedy for Bevan, but he did write a strongly worded letter to Time magazine in response to the piece it had recently published on Bevan. Here he stated that, "This unfortunate woman, who sits in the sideshow of Ringling Brothers between Fat Lady and Armless Wonder, and affects white lace hats, woolen mittens, and high lace shoes, has a story which is far from mirth-provoking. She was previously a vigorous and good-looking young woman, but has become the victim of a disease known as acromegaly. Being a physician, I do not like to feel that time can be frivolous over the tragedies of disease. Mary Ann Bevan eventually died in 1933. If treated today, acromegaly does not severely impact one's life expectancy. But in the early 20th century, sufferers would generally have their life expectancy reduced by 10 to 15 years. Such was the case with Mary Ann Bevan, who died on December 26, 1933, just a few days after her 59th birthday. Fortunately, her children fulfilled her dying wish and had her brought back to England to be laid to rest. She was buried at Brockley and Ladywell cemeteries in Lewisham, southeast London. It should be noted that her demise might have been accelerated by a considerable drinking problem in her later years, one which was no doubt exacerbated by her disease and the manner in which she was ridiculed on a nearly daily basis for years. Mary Ann Bevan's story has been periodically retold in the 80 years plus since her death. This is owing to both the notoriety which she briefly had in America in the 1920s, and also because her story is indicative of the rather callous attitude society had towards people with physical abnormalities as recently as the 1920s. Sometimes Bevan reappears in popular culture in more distasteful ways. In the early 2000s, major card manufacturer and stationery company Hallmark began selling a birthday card making fun of the world's ugliest woman. This featured a picture of Mary Ann Bevan and referenced a blind date show at the time, in which participants had to pick from 3 contestants that they could not see. The idea was meant to be that the participant chose door number 3, behind which Mary Ann Bevan was waiting. This birthday card was spotted on sale in London in 2006 by Dr. Wouter de Herder, a Dutch consultant endocrinologist at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. De Herder was visiting the UK for work and had recently written a research paper which referenced Bevan's life and her struggles with acromegaly. He was appalled by the card and complained to Hallmark that, to quote, "I simply don't think it's right in 2006 to use her image to create a sick birthday card. I feel that this card is insulting to all patients who suffer from the same condition." Hallmark reluctantly accepted it was wrong for them to make a sick woman the butt of a joke. But they only stopped further production and refused to take any cards which had already been produced out of circulation. As Robert Nuttall, the chief executive officer of the Pituitary Network Association, a group which focuses on supporting people with pituitary-related diseases such as acromegaly, subsequently commented, "To make money from the misery and misfortune of others is shameful. This is corporate greed taken to its lowest level." Therefore, Mary Ann Bevan was a woman who, despite all her hardships, managed to make the most of her situation, even though at her own expense. She earned money and gave her children a brighter future and more opportunities than she received in her youth. Thank you for following the deeply moving story of Mary Ann Bevan. If you found this content helpful and meaningful, please hit like, share this video so more people can learn about her story. Don't forget to subscribe to Project 360 Official and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next fascinating and impactful stories. See you all in the next video.